Hi YouTube. Today I'm going to be talking about borderline personality disorder and astrological placements or aspects that can be associated with the disorder or can be misdiagnosed as well. So along with the aspects and just placements that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about also what borderline personality disorder is. I'm also going to be talking about the chakras that can be correlated with this disorder and the hormones that can also be correlated with it. Now, this is a disorder that has to be diagnosed. So if by the end of this video you believe that you have this, I definitely recommend seeking help and treatment. This isn't going to be purely if you have these placements, you have this disorder. And this isn't going to say if you don't have these placements, then you don't have the disorder. I just find some commonalities with certain placements that can be misdiagnosed or just associated with certain mental disorders or mood disorders, stuff like that, that I want to help bring awareness using astrology to these disorders if that's a way that will help people heal and gain a better understanding. It's all about correlating the spiritual with the scientific in a sense, and I truly do not mean to offend anybody. Um, I also am not a psychologist, and I don't credit myself to be a professional astrologist either. I'm a psych major and I teach what I learn, essentially. So I thought that this could be something helpful, but there's also a line that I may cross, and if I do, then feel free to leave your thoughts in there, and I won't film any more of these videos. But if you end up liking them and you find them informative and useful, let me know so I can film other videos with other disorders if you guys would like that. So borderline personality characteristics in the two psychologists, you have to have like poorly regulated emotions. They usually have trouble kind of understanding what their emotions are, how to respond properly to certain situations that not normal people, but what normal people would qualify as normal, a normal emotional response. They usually don't fit that characteristic. There can be extreme rage, anger, sadness. There can be emotional outbursts. Now, there's also this thing, another division of borderline personality disorder that's characterized as quiet borderline personality disorder. So some people you can tell automatically by the way that they respond emotionally to things, and others you can't. So it kind of goes hand in hand, and on that you should do your own research or seek help as well. Along with that, there is a tendency for impulsive behaviors and irrational thinking, and a lot of the times you'll find that there's not a lot of logic that they seem to kind of exude when they are in a high emotional state. Not to say that they are illogical or irrational all the time, just usually when they're at their peak of anger or sadness, there can be a state of confusion. And I'm going to be talking about the hormones and the parts of the brain as well that indicate these things or that control or trigger them. There can be an inaccurate perception of who they are, of themselves, who they believe that they are. They can create an ego if their ego if someone offends them, they might secretly put themselves up on a pedestal, or they might see themselves completely different as other people see them for who they are. And there can be high levels of suspicion as well in regards to how people view them and how they're viewed in society. There's also a tendency for unstable relationships because of this suspicion. They may fear that the people close to them are out to get them, they're lying to them, they don't understand them, or because they tend to have this all or nothing personality to them, where It's almost a little bit scorpionic, but not really. It's just like extremely intense. So when they're in relationships, it's very hard for them to be 100% honest, or to be 100% stagnant all the time. You'll find that their emotions can be a little up, down, and it can be very confusing for their partner to understand them. So that can lead to certain unstable type of relationships and friendships as well. They can have emotional outbreaks towards the people that they're in relationships with. But keep in mind that there's also the quiet version of this disorder. So there can be like an unseen side of this, and it can all be underneath rather than external, and it can just be internal paranoia. The causes for BPD, not bipolar, sorry, borderline personality, is usually due to poor parentinghood, but recently they have found out that it's due also to genetics and biological factors. Poor parenting can fall under the categories of abuse or trauma, or one parent abusing the child and the other parent the neglecting the situation. So any terms of just malnurturing from the parental figures at an early age can be a cause for developing BPD, or later on in your adulthood, or mainly at adolescence is when it starts to develop as well, or when you'll start to see it, especially when you're bringing in hormones to the situation as well. So what happens here when it's biological or genetic predisposition, that means that you can come from an unstable parental background that may have had bipolar disorder or any mood irregularities, along with either narcissism or borderline personality disorder. So there can be a predisposition to it. Sorry. And then when you're dealing with how the brain works here, you're going to find that they usually have higher levels of serotonin and higher levels of adrenaline as well, or an imbalance in testosterone and estrogen, but I'll get to that later as well. But basically, the parts of your brain that regulate your emotions, which are associated with the limbic system, and within the limbic system, the hypothalamus, and that's what regulates your emotional responses to situations and to the external world, along with the amygdala, which is all about your flight or fight responses, and it deals with what you fear. So that can tie in with the impulsive behaviors as well. So you'll find that certain parts of their brain that aren't active in normal brains are active or overly active in people that have borderline personality disorder, and a lot of the parts that deal with rational thinking and logical thinking might be a little bit more inactive. Okay? So just like the brain pathways that communicate to the neurons that say, okay, this is how you should respond, this is what makes me angry, this is what I'm scared of, they don't communicate properly. That's all. So that's the biological factor to it as well. And then when you're dealing with the hypothalamus, like I said, that regulates emotional responses, there can be overactivity or inactivity in that. Really just depends. You'll find that because their amygdala is usually overactive, you'll find that a lot of them are scared and have weird paranoias and weird fears that are kind of irrational and illogical, yet they have this risky impulsive behavior to them because they tend to not be afraid of certain situations that people that have a normal working amygdala would be scared of. So that can give them that impulsive, risky behavior that makes them want to have risky sex, that can cause them to confront people in a high state of agitation. It can cause them to impulsively spend money, and it can also cause them to either like drive drunkly, try drugs. They're just very that they can be very risky with the things that actually put them in danger, and have more fear of things that shouldn't cause fear, like what people think of them, or like um, what their certain like fears of regarding animals or certain insects or certain situations that they imagine in themselves to fear themselves. There can be fear of spiders, fear of snakes, uh, weird dreams involving cliffs, feeling as if they're falling or dying almost, but they're not like real, they're not tangible things that are actually happening to them, whereas the situations that are actually putting them in danger, they love that. They're risk takers. They love that rush of adrenaline. It makes them feel almost it makes them feel a high, because when you have you're in a situation that produces adrenaline, that produces your serotonin, and serotonin is that naturally uh, producing that chemical in our brain that produces that feeling of almost like electricity running through our body. It's that happy, naturally feel good drug. So they usually chase those feelings because naturally they can come here uh, with this disorder. They can feel very isolated from people. There can be periods of depression just because they have their body doesn't regulate hormones the way that it should. I keep wanting to say normal people. I don't mean to say that you're not normal. It's just like I'm talking about like normal levels of hormones and normal brain activity. Like that's what I mean. But yeah, so let's move on. I have my notes, by the way. That's what I keep looking down at. So, like we said, overactive limbic system, which is kind of what helps your emotional, what deals with, is correlated with your emotional responses. Now, this is fully developed at age 25. So, a reason that BPD is more likely to be shown in adolescence is because that's when the brain is starting to fully finish developing. So, teenagers that try drugs, heavy amounts of drugs especially, and drugs that mess around with your serotonin and levels of adrenaline as well, can cause BPD, because you're now destroying the parts of your brain and your hormone levels again, so that your body's not naturally producing them. So that can cause stress and agitation towards certain situations or people, because when you don't have that, your hormones aren't being regulated naturally, it's very hard to see clearly. And adrenaline, when it's being produced in high rates, or even in some cases low rates, you'll see that there can be a state of confusion or fogginess. Same thing with serotonin as well. Now, a part of the a part of BPD, when it's developed before birth, is kind of like the limbic system is the second part. It's one of the first parts of the brain to develop, and I believe it's the second, but I'm not quite sure. So if there's any damage to that at an early age, or if the mother is consuming alcohol when she's pregnant, or eating foods with high preservatives and stuff that's just not good for the baby to consume, or the fetus, essentially, then there can be some damage to the limbic system, which can already cause damage to it before it is even fully developed, and that will show more in adolescence. If the limbic system is damaged in adolescence, you'll see the causes and the the effects of BPD towards early adulthood around the age of 25. Really just depends on the person. So now I want to talk about, what should I talk about the hormones first? We already did that. Okay, so hormones are chemical substances which coordinate the activities of living organisms and their growth, all right? And they are secreted through endocrine glands that we have in our bodies. Now, the two main hormones correlated with BPD are going to be oxytocin, serotonin, and adrenaline, all right? Adrenaline usually deals with your quick reactions, how you respond in a situation that needs your immediate response, and it deals with our impulse. It's secreted by the medulla, adrenal glands, as well as the central nervous system neurons. And then serotonin regulates your mood, your memory, your sleep, and so many other things. But what I want to focus on is the mood. So if there's an irregularity in that, there can be high levels of agitation and states of confusion when dealing with certain situations. Also, check out your levels of estrogen and testosterone before fully getting a diagnosis, because estrogen and testosterone also deal with your moods. So if you are meant to have higher levels of estrogen, you'll find, and you have lower levels of estrogen when you're supposed to have higher, you'll find that you're going to be moody and overly emotional in things of the sentiments, things that make you cry, things that hurt your feelings, testosterone will deal more with uh, feelings of stress and of anger. And you can usually see and tell if you have an imbalance in those that are causing you to react irrationally through physical characteristics. So that can come through with acne or facial hair or body sweat, body odor, things like that. So get those checked out as well before jumping to conclusions on if you have BPD, because there's a bunch. What I'm trying to get across is that there's your hormones, and then there's your brains, and then there is the nurturing, how you were nurtured as a child. So there's many points to consider before diagnosing or coming to conclusions on what you have if you don't have it, etc., etc. So now talking about the chakras, I think that there's 3 chakras that can be blocked and also be confused with BPD. Okay? So the crown chakra, it deals with the unity of the body. It deals with the understanding of self. It deals with your emotions and the soul in general. So if that's blocked, there can be a little bit of confusion around your identity, who you are, your purpose. It can give you lack of clarity about your emotions in general. Your throat chakra, if that's blocked, the throat chakra deals with emotional balances and how we communicate our emotions. So if that's blocked, then you'll find that communicating your emotions may be quite difficult. Therefore, you might come across to people almost like you don't make sense, or that they can't really understand you, which can be frustrating for you and the person that you're communicating with. Lastly, the heart chakra, which deals with compassion, forgiveness, and unconditional love. When you have BPD, there is usually unstable relationships, that all or nothing mindset that can kick in when it's like, oh, they screwed me over, I'm never going to talk to them again. Oh, they have it out for me, I'm never going to talk to them, I'm going to shut them out. So usually when the heart chakra is blocked, it's hard to forgive, it's hard to move on, it's hard to let go, and it's hard to love, essentially. And when we're dealing with especially mood disorders or difficulties regulating emotions, we're usually dealing with someone that is hurt or lacks love or wasn't loved or wasn't nurtured properly. So the heart chakra deals a lot when you're dealing with disorders in general. Okay, so on to the placements. Let me mark this down so I know when to put the timestamp. 1850. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is issues with nurturing. Now, if there's issues with nurturing in your childhood, let's say you were grown up in an abusive home, or your mother didn't attend to all of the needs that you had to be dealt with, that you had to receive in order to fully develop properly, then that can lead to BPD. So one that I would say, I put down 3 that deal with issues of nurturing. So Moon square Chiron, that shows lack of nurture from your mother. It shows an unstable bond with the mother, and it shows that there's issues giving and receiving love. There can be an uncomfortability with receiving love. You'll feel different, you'll feel left out, and when you're dealing with Chiron, Chiron is the wounded healer. It doesn't understand itself completely. It doesn't heal itself completely unless it goes through like it takes kind of like a lifetime to deal with having moon Chiron placements, because it's very difficult to understand what's wrong with you, because parts of the childhood are naturally kind of blocked out. Therefore, uh, issues with memory, which can also be associated with serotonin. Issues with remembering your childhood, why you are the way that you are, can be a little bit fuzzy. So Moon Square Chiron people they understand that there's something wrong, there's something missing, they're they feel inadequate. There can be issues with low self-esteem as well, but yet they have a very, very difficult time maintaining relationships, whether they are romantic or platonic. And that is one of the checkpoints when you are diagnosing BPD, is issues with unstable relationships. Um, Moon square Pluto, this checkpoint would be, I believe, impulsive behaviors and poorly regulated emotional responses. Moon square Pluto people have a very, very hard time expressing emotions naturally and calmly, because they're bottlers. They bottle things up. So they can go even for months on end. It doesn't even have to be days or weeks. Things that will hurt them will cut them deeply, but they will keep it inside. So when the bottle the cap pops off, all of these emotions get spewed out, and there's anger, and there's sadness, and there's irritability, and everyone around them is going to be like, what's wrong? Like, why are you reacting like this? It's very irrational in the eyes of other people, because they don't process their emotions naturally, because they had a lack of nurture from usually their mother. When we're talking about the moon, we're going to be associating with the mother. And keep in mind that our subconscious can be imprinted from a very young age, before we're even like physically like conscious, like before we can even start remembering things, you know? So the subconscious is always kind of active. So even if you didn't know that you were like neglected as a like infant, that stuff can be imprinted in there. And usually Moon square Pluto people have a hard time feeling as if they're understood, and feeling as if their emotions are validated. A lot of the times it can be associated with BPD, because BPD deals also with emotional invalidation. Okay, their emotions usually aren't validated by the people around them, which makes them feel crazy, or makes them feel like there's something wrong with them. So Moon square Pluto people, you'll find that they have a very hard time communicating their emotions just in general, and they kind of like will burst. So yeah. So Pluto or Chiron in the fourth house. Chiron is our wound that we come in with this life, and that can be uh, anything really, but when it's placed in the fourth house, then you're dealing with issues with nurturing. Pluto in the fourth house also deals not necessarily just with issues of nurturing, but I would say more issues of emotional stability, because when there's a lot of turbulence in the home life and a child is developing emotionally and mentally, it can be very hard for them when you have Pluto in the fourth house to kind of adapt or actually have their emotional needs taken care of, which kind of leads to resentment and anger towards their family, or people who have signs that fall into their fourth house. They'll have issues dealing with them as well. Chiron in the fourth house, that's just a shit show, bro. Like, you just were never taken care of properly as a kid, or you'd never felt like that. So those are like the four things I would say that can be associated with BPD, because they deal with nurturing after birth. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that develops your emotional responses to things and all that. So things that deal with identity. So a check mark that psychologists would consider before fully diagnosing someone with BPD is how they identify themselves, how the patient identifies themselves as. Is there a fogginess, a disillusion around who they are? Yeah. So basically, I would say that the one I chose, there can be more, but usually like Sun Neptune influences. So if you have an aspect between your Sun and your Neptune, usually harder aspects, this can show that you see yourself completely different as what other people would see you as, or as an escaping mechanism or a way to kind of escape your low self esteem or the way that you view yourself. You create this fantasy of who you wish to be and who you think that you are, but the qualities that you imagine or fantasize about aren't actually produced externally. Therefore, nobody actually sees you as that, and you're not actually that person or the person that you think you are. That is just a defense mechanism that you have developed as a way to cope with the fact that you don't like yourself. So that can be an astrological aspect that can be correlated with BPD. I wonder how many times I say that. Comment them. Oh my god. Okay, so when we're dealing with paranoia about relationships, that check mark for diagnosing BPD, I would say Saturn in the 11th house or Sun and Moon in the 10th house. Saturn in the 11th house deals about restrictions with friendships, usually because there is a fear of getting close to people. So therefore, you'll find that they have an unstable relationship with the people close to them. They can be they'll go out with their friends one day and then isolate and retreat for a week and not answer their phone. That's how they kind of work. There's a certain arm's distance that they keep from everybody. They're a little bit more skeptical of the people around them, and they usually don't even feel as if they fit in with anybody. They don't want to be in a group. They'd rather be more independent. And this, you wouldn't think that this would be a problem. It not all the time that it's a problem, but sometimes the ego can kick in, and the ego can be, I don't need anybody. I'm better than being in a friend. If they're not accepted by people that they want to be accepted by, then they can develop this ego attitude that justifies them being alone because they hate the fact that they're excluded. They secretly hate that they don't fit in, and they secretly want to, but they don't want to show weakness. Saturn in the 11th house, it's a little bit cold, it's a little bit calculating when dealing of issues of friends and emotional connections with the external world and community and networking. So they develop an ego to justify the fact that they are better than those people that are excluding them. So Sun and Moon in the 10th house. The 10th house can be a little bit tricky here because also you're dealing with the ego, but also insecurity. That's the funny thing. It's like the ego is just developed from pain and insecurity and feeling not good enough, like straight up. It deals with your self-worth, and the 10th house is all about the public eye, how people view you, how you want to be seen almost. You care a lot about what the external and the public eye views you as. Therefore, there can be paranoia about what people think about you and the relationships that you develop because you are always thinking about what does that person think of me? You know what I mean? And then you're imagining what other people think of you, even though it may not even be what they think of you. They're very quick if they have a damaged ego, or even if they're just emotionally sensitive to criticism. You'll find that they jump to conclusions about what people think of them or how they're seen or perceived by society, their friends, or their coworkers and stuff like that. So there can be a little bit paranoia when you have that. Also, paranoia can also kick in if you have heavy Aquarius or Virgo placements because they tend to overanalyze, and both Aquarius and Virgo tend to feel a little bit isolated and almost like an alien from society because especially if, okay, let me put it this way. If you mix Aquarius Virgo placements with either like weed or like other drugs, stuff like that, you're going to get paranoia about the people around you, who you are as a person, and you're going to have difficulties expressing your emotions. That's besides the drugs. I'm done talking about the drugs and the weed. If you mix that with that, then you might get paranoia. But now moving on, Aquarius and Virgo both have this cold, calculating demeanor when dealing and processing emotions. Therefore, it can be very hard for them to even communicate or reach out for help if they do have issues. So now when we're dealing with anger or impulse, the astrological placements that I chose were Moon square Mars. Uh, the Mars expresses how the moon feels. All right. So let's say you have a moon. Okay, I'm just going to use me for an example. I have a moon in Pisces and I have a Mars in Sagittarius. So although my feelings may be hurt or I may be sensitive and stuff like that, um, I will express it and go about that like a Sagittarius and pretend I don't care and be happy go lucky and just like pretend I'm better off. You know what I mean? Even though it may hurt me, and then I'll go away and like retreat and like deal with it. So when you have aspects, a hard aspect to your moon and your Mars, it shows that the way that you express the way that you feel is almost a little bit damaged. It doesn't flow properly. The energies don't work. So when you're dealing with Mars, the planet of aggression, and Moon, the emotions, there can be almost like a miscommunication between the two planets and the way that they are expressed, causing um, um, mal-expressions of anger and sadness and your emotions in general, or outbursts. But that would be more with the second one that I chose, which is, oh my god, I keep flinging this pencil around. I'm so sorry. Pluto square Mars, difficulties expressing feelings of anger, sadness, just negative emotions as well. It's very hard for them to express them together, and they can be a little bit more malefically. And if you feel anger or sadness, the first emotions that might be triggered after that is vindictive, jealous, envy, revenge, all that stuff, even though I kind of just said the same things over. Okay. Mars in the first house, your anger is kind of going to be out front there anyway, so that can either be correlated with BPD or misdiagnosed as BPD. And Mars in the 8th house, there's a secret agenda with the way these people deal with anger, and it can be perceived as either like a damaged Mars placement, like a detriment Mars placement. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was really long, and I'm very sorry for that. But no, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. I gotta stop saying that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. My social media will be down below. And if you guys want another video like this, let me know what disorder or, yeah, what disorder you would like to know about next. Alright? Bye.